Yeah, so, yeah, right. Yeah, I'm saying. That much. Yeah. You will? Should work. Yeah, switch over now. Like it's not calling us. And the other time, yeah, yeah, he's messing with the other. Like he's messing with the other. Like playing with the place. Like in a photo, like I didn't say limit from heroes in photo, like we just like to, I wouldn't be. I have to take it out and take it for the audience. So, yeah. I know, yeah.
Those of you who might be new to the colloquium may not know that Dr. Floyd Coleman had a vision to create a conference that he did not call a conference, but he called it colloquium because he wanted it to be a discussion, a dialogue between emerging scholars, advanced scholars, as well as those who perhaps have continued in their scholarship. And this particular colloquium that he saw, named in honor of James A. Porter, as you know from your art history classes, is considered the dean of African American history. And Porter, educated here at Howard. So we're so grateful to Dr. Coleman for having that vision. We're also very grateful that, as my pastor tends to say, suntan people have continued this tradition as long as we have. You know, sometimes you can fall out with each other directions, and as he says, it may be a quarter two here or a quarter three there, but luckily here at Howard we've been able to maintain this. And I see we're and we are fanning and getting water. That maybe we're trying to be Mexico. But things if you feel overheated and you this is an informal conversation. In space that does not belong to us, and we're trying to get help and get some air in here, but just know that we're so grateful that you're here with us and the program will help us pull all of these things together. And it's really my pleasure to bring this closing session to get it started. But before I do that, I do want to recognize our 2025 James A. Porter Book Award recipient, Dr. Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw. So very awkwardly, maybe in a churchly style, would you please stand? We are so honored that we're able to celebrate someone who really has been a consistent supporter of New Porters and visiting Dayton from afar. I also want to recognize our 2025 inaugural Lloyd Tolman Professional Excellence Award recipients who also did the labor of serving as co-guest chairs of this program. And I have, again, as I said yesterday, I have the pleasure of meeting with them weekly, bi-weekly for the last year. So if Dr. Jacqueline Francis and Kamala Diahara would stand up to imagine where the field of art history, I'm not going to say American art, I cannot imagine where the field of art history would be without the work that you have done in developing the Association for Critical Race Art History. And so it's just been an honor for you all to share your developments with us this year. And so with that, I will actually bring up Jacqueline Francis, who will then kind of briefly introduce our guests, artists that we're just honored to have on campus today. So, Dr. Francis. Thank you so much, Dr. Harvey. Please thank you, Dr. Everett. And thank you for everybody who's been here today, and certainly those who have been with us the last several days. Okay. And so you know a lot about the program, which has the biographies of these panel's speakers. They will be presented not exactly in the order, but in the order we put together one slideshow. So that will be Professor Derek Adams from Brooklyn College, then followed by Professor Lana Bundes from UMass Amherst, and really as you saw, Charleston from Jersey. And we're so honored to have them here today. The theme of the session is Artists Rethinking Race. I'm just going to say really briefly the three questions that we asked these three artist educators to think through in preparation for this afternoon. Okay, so we asked them three questions to think about, and then we'll talk about it. They'll present for about 15, 20 minutes. Then we'll come up and have a roundtable discussion and open it up. So the three questions: what formal and conceptual strategies do you draw upon to move beyond the U.S., beyond the U.S. white, non-white, socio-political binary? That's question one. Question two: that is Maria Holloway and I argue that racial difference, specificity, is an always already aspect in arguments, whether the work is figurative, abstract, conceptual, and so forth. This is present even in audiences' reception of these kinds of arguments, whatever they call them. And we ask each panelist, can you expand on whether this premise is relevant to your practice? The third question we asked each of these artists to think through is, the meanings of race emerge from the multi-axial context with gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nationality, and ability. Race is one aspect among the many multi-axial identifications, disidentifications, and disavows in visual connection. Can you please share your thoughts on the notion of intersectionality, a term that describes the simultaneity of lived identities and cultural, social, and political identifications and dissemination? So those are the three questions. I'll say them a couple of times so that we about them, and we have the artists presenting their work, and then they'll come up again. So we'll start off first with Professor Derek Adams. Please welcome.
Greetings, everyone. I'm very excited to be here, and honored to be here on Howard's campus to have a conversation about the things that I believe are very valuable to me and things that I think we all have in common as individuals and as a cultural group. Starting off my presentation, I'd like to refer to quotes and thoughts of artists, writers, people who I tend to lean on for motivation to somehow align them and align myself with centering blackness, something that can be somewhat challenging for us as we are creatives, held with certain responsibilities to uphold that are not always things that we naturally consider, but things that are somewhat imposed or ideologies that are collectively agreed upon culturally. One thing that I came to realize as a black artist in graduate school is because of my cultural perspective or my cultural existence, that as a black person, I'm political. There's nothing I can do that will remove that from the scenario of the interpretation or experience of looking at whatever I make. And with that in mind, it actually gave me a certain form of liberation to kind of center myself as an artist, as a person, and to speak in a way that I felt was genuine to my lived experience and the conversations that I was having with family and friends throughout my year, to reflect upon that for a sense of inspiration and also reference. And this first one is one of my favorite writers, critical writers, Bell Hooks. I'm sure a lot of other people are favorite critical writers. And this is a phrase that I speak about all the time as an artist, because as a black person, we are constantly put in a position to speak on behalf of others and not realizing that we are the other. And so to speak from where you are is speaking for others. So the idea of being an individual is pretty non-existent, but we do have this experience that you can share that may be unique or feel unique to you. So in this quote, it says the function of art is to be more than tell it like it is, is to imagine what is possible. And I think about that when I'm making art. What do I want to leave behind when I think about, the time that I pass? And one thing I think about all the time in my studio is that, and I tell artists this all the time, when you're in your studio, and you leave, you might not ever come back. That's the reality. So what do you want people to know? That you left behind. This is what happens. When you're an artist or a creative person, your legacy is what's left behind. And if you are not speaking in a way that was genuine to you, then people they will never hear your voice. They would only hear voices of other people speaking through you. And that's important to remember that as an artist. So one of the things that was very important to me, because I believe in politics and I believe in the power of community, I started to think about how black people normally look at leisure as a generative practice. Growing up in a family, most people think of leisure as being non-productive. And if you come from a history of family who worked a lot, blue-collar workers, if you were not doing something physically, then you were not doing anything. But I believe as I started to understand the intellectual part of being an artist, a lot of the things that I make are based on what I process when I'm not making things. And a lot of things that people see from me are things that I imagine while I'm in my bed, or when I'm sitting in a chair, or when I'm on vacation. And those things are really important to understand. So I started to reflect on some of the political leaders that influence where we are today. And so MLK is one of the main people that I really, as many other people do, look at as almost a godlike figure. He's iconic, he's important, but most of the images of Martin Luther King are images of him in conflict or in some level of protest. And I was curious if there were images that didn't reflect that. So I was online researching, and I came out with this image that was from a Jet magazine interview with him and his wife in Jamaica. And they were interviewing him, he was talking about how he felt so free, being here, being in this space. And I started to think about the power of this image, more so than some of the images where he's constantly battling, pushing up against things. The fact that this person who is so iconic, who's so important, who's faced with so many things, that the idea of relaxation was something that was not promoted equally. The image of him in the pool was not promoted the way we see other images of him being arrested. And so as an artist, my response was to make works that reflect this image today within black culture. So I created a series called The Floater. And so the Floater series, which a lot of people have some familiarity with now, were images where I started taking pictures of my family in our pool, different places I would go. I would photograph people just laying around, not doing anything. And I also realized, in my pursuit of this, I realized that we're never not doing anything. When we're in a barbershop, we're talking politics. We're in a hair salon, we're talking about stuff. When we're in the kitchen table, we're talking about stuff. So it's not that, the idea that the intentionality was not an awareness for us. The intentionality of relaxation. The deliberateness of it. And what happens when that happens. So I really started to reflect on that with this particular work. So I started to think of these works as being political. I started to understand that the existence of being became a political movement in black culture in general. And when I would look at things on television, when black people were usually in some type of altercation with whoever, it was usually when we were at a pool, or we're at a park trying to have a barbecue with our family, or when we're just trying to eat at a restaurant. Things that most people never think about having some level of conflict to do something so simple, so normal, so human. But those are the things that are more of a disruption to our existence as black people. So I think that we, because of those disruptions that happened all those times, we don't look at those times as being as significant to be able to have access to have the normalcy of what other people take advantage of and don't consider as being a very privileged space to be in. So moving past that body of work, I started to, most of my work always starts with research, even though a lot of times the work that I create has a more imaginative, more fantastical nature. It starts from a very real place where I go to Schomburg, I look at materials, I dig deep on things that are not digitized for inspiration. And so with that, what I did with the Floater series, which I did a little bit more deep diving into archive, refined images, reflecting things I wanted to make work about. I did the same thing with the Green Book, Negro Militant Guy. I discovered it in Schomburg. I started to look through it. And instead of thinking about the conflict or the trauma associated with why it existed, I started to think about the accolade and the acknowledgement that Mr. Green and his wife, Alma Green, did not get for doing it. And the fact that these black people who had a whole totally different job during the day, working at the post office, came home afterwards and did this publication, just to have black people feel normal in the way that they navigated around the country. And with all of the conversations around the book and all the traumatic history that are associated with the book, no one seemed to acknowledge the creative endeavor of this person who is not a graphic designer, who is not a designer in any way, came home and created this publication. This publication lasted for some time until the Civil Rights era. And when he made it, in the opening of the Green Book, he writes a paragraph that says that he didn't acknowledge what was happening in the world. He said he made this book so black people would not have to deal with the inconvenience of what was happening in society. And he believed that this book would not be a book that would last for a long period of time. He thought it was a temporary solution for something that would be corrected. So the fact that he made something that was temporary, he thought was temporary, that was not made to last for a long period of time, but he put so much effort in doing it. He even convinced a printing shop after work to come to allow him to print this book. And the way he was able to compile this data was because it was a segregated union for postal workers, he was able to compile this data with other black postal workers who traveled around the country delivering mail. And that's how the Green Book became established. But that was never something people talked about. And so as an artist, I like to talk about things that I feel will empower other black people. And so I think that this is like a zine. Free zine. And so I really got into this celebrating. So I was invited to do a show at the Museum of Art and Design, and I made the show about him and Alma Green, who designed the publication. So I wanted to make the show about honoring their creative design and what their design represented in the real experience as an artist who were walking through the work. The show is called Sanctuary. So I combined a bunch of elements that were historic in a lot of ways. The flat hat, the flat cap, historically, prior to the baseball cap, it was considered a worker's man hat. And people were chauffeurs and bus drivers wore the hat before the cap was created. And during segregation, black men who had nice cars or who thought they would stop by, whatever challenges they had, they would wear this hat when they drove and their family would drive in the back to seem as they were chauffeurs versus having their family in the front with them. Their wife would ride in the back of the car. And this was a disguise to get through things. Also, they had houses that were considered houses, you turn the lights on in certain sundown towns. If you saw a light on and it had a sign in the window, it could be a funeral home, it could be a place that operated a totally different thing during the day. It was open for black travelers to come in at certain times when the night came upon us. They would stay here until the next morning. So this is a version of talking about that, talking about the different things that existed. The works that were on the wall were all highlighting certain aspects of offerings that were businesses that occupied different cities. So I conceptually used this information that was in the directory to as an influence for referencing the book within my work. This particular piece is called Come On By, Mr. Hoodrich. And basically this is about, the thing what's so interesting about the book is that it's like a regular directory. The best thing about this thing that was created by the Green is that they also created an archive. They didn't even think that they was creating an archive. But when you start putting addresses in places and start putting, cities in different places and those places are no longer around, you created an archive of what was there. And these places are historic in a lot of senses because there's places that MLK have eaten at, Malcolm X have eaten at, black celebrities who couldn't go to certain places have stayed. So what happened with this endeavor that was just about traveling, it created this whole historical, we look at now historically, when we're thinking about the way that black people moved around the country. Another piece. And so with these works actually were really influenced by looking at Jacob Lawrence migration series. And in these particular works, I used the color palette of Jacob Lawrence migration series in these works. So if you see the migration series next to these works, you can see the color variations, the commonality that exists within. To talk about the idea of travel. In these particular works is a combination of brick pattern structures that are related to the architectural framework of buildings, but then attached to those are handles that are usually associated with baggage or luggage or something like that. That's kind of running through all the work. And the windows really speak on the human embodiment of the subject that I'm interested in, and I kind of fuse it through this work. This particular work, unlike the floaters, really takes the figure out in a more representational way, and it shows more metaphoric relationships to the body and to architecture and to geography. So then I pivoted to this body of work that was influenced by innovation. I was invited to go to Stony Island Arts Bank, a space founded and created by Diaspora Gates. It just opened. I came there, the Johnson Archive was housed there, and I was invited to do an exhibition. So I decided to go to the archive and focus on a particular period within the reference material of the Johnson publication. What I really was stuck on and was blown away by is black people's interest in science during the Civil Rights era. There was quite a few interviews and journals where they were talking about space, about inventions, about technology, all happening around 1968, 74. And so I started to extract those things from the publication, making copies, and I decided to create a sci-fi experience in the space by using the images from the archive to create these kind of orbital collages that kind of wrapped around the gallery space. And the show is called Future People. And in this exhibition, I not only made the collages that are wrapped around the space, I had access to Frankie Knuckles' archive, which was also housed in the bank. And so I decided to animate the floating objects in the video piece, which is right here in the far back. And it was an orbiting piece that moved. The space junk was coming towards you, which were the objects I collected from the archive and scanned them. And the viewers could sit in these crafted aircraft chairs as being part of the experience. In these collages, I also included paper plates as a version of the disc. Because for me, I try to think about things that are duplicitous in nature and the way that they operate. And when you think about the solar dish, it's about information bouncing off of different things. To me, that's what I think about when I think about the paper plate and the way that black people or communities use the paper plate for sharing information, sharing food. So I use the paper plate as something that was recognizable as a relational aesthetic to talk about space. And all of these objects that are kind of floating around are things that were part of inventions, things that were reinvented, things that were interpreted by, I guess, architects, engineers, people, astronauts, people who were really talking about the idea of space during this era. And also combining some of the traditional African artifacts that were used for, you know, spiritual reasons, ceremonial, medicinal, different things like that. What's the last piece? No, it's not actually. So this is kind of a wrap up. So moving forward from that, I decided to get really into looking at the archive again. So I went to the Schomburg, because I learned that Patrick Kelly's archive was donated to the Schomburg. Dalma Golden, the curator, director of City Museum, told me it was there. He helped to organize it, to send it there. So I went to the Schomburg to look at what was donated of Patrick Kelly. And when I discovered a very interesting archive, no clothes of course, but there were drawings from clothing lines that he produced. There were also personal notes from his friends to him, birthday photographs, and just a bigger sense of him as a creator, more than just a designer. So I spent a couple of months looking through the archive, looking at different things, and I came up with an idea that became a body of work. In the archive, I discovered a letter from Dr. Maya Angelou. She had written a letter to a publisher pleading the case of giving Patrick a book. She thought that he deserved a book, and she wanted to write the book. And she had this one long page describing him and talking about his achievements as a young designer. And she called the book Patrick Kelly, The Journey. So I decided to call the exhibition Patrick Kelly, The Journey. So these shows are like traveling exhibitions, but I'm just giving a sense of where they first were installed, because I think that that's an important part of understanding the way the work exists and the way it transfers over to another space. So this exhibition was in SCAD Fash Museum in Savannah. After being a City Museum exhibition that was housed in the County Cullen Library, that historically was Madam C.K. Walker's home at one point. This is a portrait of Patrick. He was well known for wearing a denim overall, which was kind of like go-to outfit. And so I basically took it apart, and I see in these collages that are called mood boards, elements of his ready-to-wear clothing patterns that he sold for Vogue and other clothing brands. So I used a lot of his patterns in these collages that I made to, I guess, to conjure up Patrick. I always think when I'm making work, I'm in conversation with the person that I'm inspired by. Like I think like, what would they think? Would they like this? You gotta think like that when I'm in my studio, kind of working out certain things, because I think that a lot of ideas that I have are not set in any particular place of reference that I can look in a book to see exactly what I'm thinking or how I'm communicating. Because with my generation and the artists who are here, we are the first generation of artists who can reference other black artists. Mm-hmm. The generation we look at did not have that. If you think about David Hammond, he looked at Duchamp. I can look at David Hammond. So thinking about that, to me, is a step forward creatively as an artist. Not that those other artists are not important to reference, but we have options. And I think that's important. So this is installation. When I decided to have the show in Atlanta, A lot of models or friends of Patrick reached out to the museum. A lot of them still had outfits from Patrick or Patrick designed for them, and they asked me could they include them in the exhibition. So Pat Cleveland, who's one of the models that most people know, this is her outfit right here that Patrick made for her, that she donated to the exhibition. They also, because Patrick first started off in Atlanta, working in a small shop. So a lot of the people who knew from Atlanta, they brought these photographs for the exhibition, and we displayed them in the case to give it more context, because it became like a celebration of Patrick beyond my work, and I love that, you know. And this is another work employed by Patrick. It's another work. This was a mural that I was commissioned to make in Chicago at the fashion outlet in Chicago. It's a permanent mural that's in the front of the stage. It's called Fashion Show. And a lot of the mood board pieces have like a reference to that, to fashion, or Ebony Fashion Fair, or any of those things that I always think about when I think about like my aunts and my mother and people like that, and things they care about. It makes it very easy to name things that if you have some lived experience or reference to it, that it just innately part of your daily conversation that you have with your family and with people who you consider the leaders of your family. I was asked to also design the lighting that led you into the mall, and I work with some lighting designers in Chicago, and these pieces are called fashion accessories. That's it. Thank you.
So our next speaker will be Professor Wanahandes in Florida. I have known Eric for a really long time, and so this is the first time I've ever had the opportunity to listen to him talk with this length. And now I'm kind of like shaken up because he makes it seem so easy. But so I want to thank Melanie Harvey, Jacqueline Francis, Marlene Holloway for your invitation, for your presentation yesterday, for making my work here a lot easier. I was a little bit overwhelmed when I got the invitation and the questions. And so I maybe have put too many slides together, and I'll see that. You got peeps in the house. So I'm going to begin, and I'm going to begin with a story that is a sideline completely. And so I started to go to Holland to do work, and we'll see the work later on. And I remember being on a flight, and they came by and they handed out a small piece of, it was a small little box, right? And the outside of the box it said, "Discover Cuba." I mean, rediscover Cuba. And I'm like, how can you rediscover a place that's been discovered? There have people there from the beginning. And so then I opened it up, and it was a Hershey's Kiss in white and brown chocolate. And I was just devastated. It felt so wrong and so it wasn't not only were you going to rediscover it, but you can consume it. You know? And it made it so, I felt weird. I was on a plane, the person next to me was a stranger, and I couldn't quite explain my discomfort. But anyway, it's the beginning of the story, and it will explain a lot of the work that I'm going to present with next. And so, to introduce myself, and I think it's important to speak about my ancestry, and so from Cuba, I'm Afro descendant, and from the Caribbean. All these three things are interwoven in the way that I exist, and it's really hard for me to separate it, right? And so this is a little complicated, and so I'm going to begin and hopefully look up my notes so that I can go ahead and figure out what it is. You're looking, on the right side, you're looking at the book Cecilia Valdez, and it's a novel written by Celio Villaverde, who was a writer and activist in Cuba who lived between 1812 and 1894, who's also a poet, and it's a novella, se llama novela of a mulata in Cuba. Next to it, you have La Casa del Beneficencia, and it's an orphanage. And it's one of the early orphanage that is built in Cuba. And let me see, and so from the information that I downloaded in Wikipedia, the bishop of the orphanage, right, would name the children that would be left. If it was a boy, the last name would be given Valdez. If it was a girl, the name would be given Rodriguez. And so the story of Cecilia Valdez is about this mulata that actually carries the name from the orphanage. The most important thing about her is that she is white passing, she's young, she's from Cuba, and she's able to move about. As it is, the telenovela is very, the novela is not a telenovela, it is a zarzuela. If you don't know what that means. It begins with her, introduces Cecilia, a beautiful light-skinned mulata, who is being pursued by the son of a Spanish slave trader named Leonardo. Unbeknownst to the two, they are children of the same father. So you know how that story ended, right? I'm not going to go into the story. There is everything, right? And it's, there's rape, there's betrayal, there's murder, there's revenge, and all of that. But at the core, the novel is about race, relation in colonial Cuba and the Caribbean. It describes the miscegenation, slavery, and colonial oppression taking place on the island. The story unfolds within the class of European, new or whites, free people of color, slaves and the groups of slaves, those who are brought from Africa and others born in the New World. This later group breaks it down into three field workers, tradesmen, and household laborers, who are all up and down in the scale. And so this brings me to the first work that I'm going to present, which is My Inheritance, Las Chancletas de Cecilia Valdez. And in this particular work, I was really thinking about, well, as a woman from the Caribbean, Afro-Cuba, what is my heritage, what's my patrimony? And I realized it's this entanglement of race that is such a component of the Caribbean, right? And so the fact that we both share the surname Valdez, when I started this project, actually was like a joke, right? I thought it was a, commonality. Needless to say, later on, having a conversation with my mother, she actually mentions that my grandfather on my father's side actually was in the orphanage. And even if his parents came and sort of acknowledged him and so forth, the sense of betrayal and being originally left made him hold on to the Valdez surname. And we'll won't get to the fact the lack of the accent. But anyway, so the sandals are made of, they're actually made out of leather, but they're encased in wax and a brown wax, really made to look like almost like if they were chocolate. And so the text on the top is actually by a novel of Reynaldo Arena. So Reynaldo Arena takes the Cecilia Valdez, which also the second title is La Loma del Ángel, or the Angel Hill, and redoes it in New York as a satire, right? So you have the first Celio Villaverde writing the first novel, who actually finishes and publishes the novel in New York. You have Reynaldo Arena, who is actually a child of the Cuban Revolution, who eventually actually also exiled due to the fact that he's gay and he's prosecuted and put in prison in Cuba, and he actually ends his life in New York as well. And so the third person, of course, is me now remaking the work again. So that exile, the history of exile is so also tied to the Caribbean as well. I'm going to read you the text that is on the panel in the back. There, you can barely see. And it says, this is from Ronaldo Arena. Well, she was 12 years old, and her only passion was walking. That is, wandering the temple streets of Havana, and wearing out the wooden soles of her sandal by banging them on the pavement. The second panel, she would come and go from the Capitania to General to Montserrat Gate, going in and out of plaza and churches, deafening people with every step. But Cecilia's passion was not yet Leonardo, but the streets. And the third panel, it was as if she were incapable of stopping anywhere. All Cecilia has are the streets, the city gates, and the daylight. She only has herself, and that's all she knows. That if she stops making noise, she ceases to exist. And I was really struck by the agency that he gives her. You know, we have countless surveys and research done of young girls before they begin to get the menstrual cycle, and the kind of behavior they expose and the kind of freedom that they have, and certainly this sort of biological transformation when it happens, it alters their personality, right? But I was really interested in the agency that he gave her, in the sense of self, through noise, embodying herself, and exercising that freedom that she had. It comes at the risk of, you know, the assassination that is taking place in her life, and she doesn't know exactly how it comes to be. And so these other networks, this is Un Saco para el Viejo, really sort of go and pull within the Afro-Yoruba tradition of the relationship and the synchronicity that happens with the Catholic religion in Cuba, in which you have Yoruba deities being sort of synchronized with Catholic saints, in which they celebrate the day on the same day, they share the same color, and people during that time, the colonial time in Cuba, a lot of the Africans were able to celebrate a particular deity and so forth as they would be celebrating a Catholic saint. And so in that way, Shango becomes Santa Barbara, Yemaya with Loving Regla. And the suit that you make that is made out of burlap is normally wear on the day of San Lazarus, which is Baba Nuaye, and people will wear this in sort of a penance. They will walk, they will crawl, they drag their bodies from almost any place within the island and make it to the church on the day of the saint to celebrate. The way that it's installed and you see the pennies on the floor, it's really normally also what you do when you get to the church, you put pennies, you give pennies. And so for anybody that is coming in is probably looking at a suit that might reverend boys and other people, but if you come from our culture and you see those pennies on the floor, you know, right? You know exactly what's that other layer and that other meaning within that word, right? And why that particular material is being used. And so I tend to do this a lot within the work, and it will come back again. The next piece actually, which is Otra vez al mar, also comes from a title from Ronaldo Arena. And it's a dress that I actually belonged to me and eventually was so beautiful. It's organza from the 30s and 40s, and I decided I couldn't wear it anymore because I was going to damage, and the only best thing would be to make it into art. And so it begins to sort of, for me, really kind of work through this idea of understanding that the fact that I probably may never go back to Cuba, that that's not an accessibility. And the moment that we left as children, there was a fracture in that history, right? And that will never be my history. And so the dressing, the inside, actually on top is layered with fish hooks and lead weights. There's a light in the interior that lights the space inside, and it has an audio of two people, a man and a woman, having a conversation about whether to leave Cuba or not to leave Cuba and what does that mean. And so the dress is quite beautiful. The desire to get close to it also puts your body at risk, right? And so there's the interior and there's the exterior, and they both function, to sort of make you aware of the inability of that future that was never going to be the same as I imagined it. And so this brings me to a series of work that came to me as a gift. When you're looking at a series of prints screen printed. They're done in 3 colors, never using white or black. And it was a shower curtain that a friend of mine gave me, actually, and it was printed in black and white. And it brought to me an understanding of the commercialization of images, right, and how that happens through history and time. And so the image individually, they look, have a better, a closer one of this. They do look like images of obelisks that probably were done in France, 17 maybe, 18th century, and they were reprinted over and over again. And they kind of look exotic, you know, they're nude, they're naked, they have hair here. But if you look at their faces, they have chiseled nose, right? And so the only thing that is making them exotic is the fact that they're naked, right? They're completely exposed, accessible, and they're kind of there for you also in a way to consume. This work actually became part of a larger installation. It began as an installation that takes place in a room, and these images are screen printed directly to the wall. This work brings me back again to Holland. I returned to make this series of work, and what you're seeing is called the color China rags. And these are made out of porcelain. They're rags the same size that a normal woman would use to clean, but they're made in white porcelain, and the whole idea within this work was I started to use pigments to actually manipulate the pigments of the clay. And when you're working in ceramic and you're working in clay, people are always talking about the clay body, right? And I was like, okay, what could I do with this clay body? And so I decided to sort of manipulate the DNA of the clay body and alter that whole historical history of porcelain as being white and fragile and beautiful and sort of precious and highly commodified for all of those reasons, and also sort of overlap the whole history of mestizaje that comes in the island, and also in Latin South America, of whitening the race. Right? And the idea is through DNA, by marrying somebody lighter than you, you're actually doing the genocide of erasing that blackness, right? And it's a very common practice. People don't think there's anything wrong with it. Like, your grandmother tells you to do that, your aunt tells you to do that. You know, in many ways they continue to do that, and so it's not thought in the way that it's really done. But I was really interested in being able to sort of alter that sort of whiteness, right, and change the color of the porcelain, and bringing in color in a way and shaping it that also felt very feminine, sexual at time, and each piece is individually, and it has the sort of casualness in the same way that a woman in a kitchen after cleaning the floor or the counter would just hang it, right? And I was really interested in combining all of those things to make this particular body of work. And so this next step, or this next series of body, sort of really bring back to what does it mean for me to be a Cuban woman in America, right? How do I sort of understand or behave as a black body in America? I don't and can never assume to have the same Baptist, Southern sort of migration experience. Like, that's not my history. And so, but I do have a common history, and that is blackness, right? What does it mean to be black in America? And it is from this perspective that I sort of begin to also deal with the work, and also understanding that I am an immigrant. That part of me that makes me an immigrant will never go away. But that is a lens that I also use to sort of begin to talk about the nuances and sort of understanding the complexity of race and the gender and the body sort of moving through society. And what you're looking at is one of the first works. These are a series of boats, and this is when I began to do sort of work with porcelain. In the background, you have a piece, which is a performance piece that I did in Havana And where you see me right now is in the Malecon, and I'm actually on the rocks, which is really crazy of me. That's the Atlantic right there, but I saw some boys jumping. I'm like, they're jumping, I can step on the rocks. It's not going to happen to me. No wave is going to come and splash me out into the Atlantic. And so what I did there, and so these two pieces later on are combined. I was in the Malecon for most of the day. Again, went back to the novella of Cecilia Valdez, and I would rip the pages, make them into small paper boats, and then I would step on the rocks and try to throw them into the water and sort of kind of usher them into the sea to see if they would sail away, right? A horrible metaphor for people on an island who are trying to leave and have no way of doing it. But it was a fatality, and I understood it, and I wanted to use literature, which is something both I love, to show the failure almost of the system and the hope that one never loses or gives up. Eventually, I was able to start to go to Holland to start working with ceramics, and the piece that you see at the bottom, actually, these are made out of white porcelain. I'm not showing you this working order. I don't know why, but I didn't do that. But this, working in Holland, dealing with ceramics, working with porcelain, brought me to these objects, right? This value of these housewares that were being made, and they were being bought and sold and produced in Asia and brought over to Europe and to the islands. And so I grew up in Cuba, and even here in the United States, and you were going to old Cuban homes, and they would have all these kind of chasta and porcelain, you know, they look like European imagery. And I really couldn't understand what the people in the island in the Caribbean, why are they buying porcelain, right? But it's that time the porcelain is being sort of really commodified by European, and it's a sign of class, it's a sign of wealth, it's a sign of mobility, and that lingers and stays in the Caribbean, right? And so these tables are set up almost like landscape, and it's really in a way to show the extraction that's taking place in these islands for resources. You know, the triangle resources are coming out of the Caribbean via free laborers of the bodies of slaves and sugar and wood and all of this and gold, and this is being taken to Europe. Europe is taking this money, going to Asia, and buying all these porcelains and valuable objects, and it sustains, the system sustains itself and continues to function in a very similar way. The work that you hear, and it sort of this work continues and it expands, and sort of again, I'm thinking about these objects moving through space, through time, where they begin, who makes it, what does it feel like, and this has happened through history in different times, thinking about what is it like to be a Chinese person making porcelain objects for Europeans, right? They have no value, no similarity to you, and a lot of the times you can see in the older pieces, the face, there's a similarity, but not necessarily done in the same way because it's really not for their own culture, and so they're mimicking and curating and sort of trying to find the closest thing that they have to reproduce this imagery. For this particular body of work, it's called Terrestrial Bodies, and so I wanted to kind of begin to place this in time and history, and for this particular work, I used the DNA of my mother's. I thought it would be less mixed than my own, and so the DNA begins like this is another thing, this happened, I did this work between 1619, and so the first number on the wall that the DNA people could give me was like 1660. And I couldn't understand why you think it only to 1660, and I was like, that's kind of bizarre. But anyway, they give you a whole set, and it's hard to see this area in here, you can see it better on the slide, actually will point out different bodies, different names of people in different parts of Africa, actually in Asia also as well. I'm partially Chinese. My mother's grandfather is 100% Chinese. And so the whole area around the room actually is this DNA done through 23 and I, where you sort of begin with like African hunter-gatherer, which is not the description, but it goes into Senegalese, it goes into, right now, all the different nationalities in Africa. It does sort of broadly European. But the work also offered for me that I had not seen before is the idea, again, of migration. I thought we would just come out with a line that says Chinese and that would be it. Instead, I get there's Vietnamese, there's from Myanmar, there's all these different areas in China. So wherever that person was and made it to Cuba had a prior migration before they even made it to Cuba. And so this brings me back into this idea that as a Latinx artist, as a Cuban, migration is such a component of the makeup and the DNA of who makes me. And so I am going to try and see if I can do it. I think the next one is a video. It's coming. Let me see if I can get it to play. Does anybody know who can make it play? Normally you just click on it, it sort of appears and there's a link underneath. It's here, you need to see it, but it doesn't play. Oh, it doesn't play. Maybe when it's okay, we'll bypass that. There is, yeah. Yes, but it'll take you, off you out. I do that. Anyway, I actually was going to take this image out and then I decided to leave it because unfortunately we'll not get to see it. The whole video is a 30-minute video of what it means to migrate. And it's done without any time having a physical body in the image, right? It's presented through objects, and so what you're seeing here is a backpack, and it's really, again, dealing with migration. When I started the project in 2017, the number was 79 million people were displaced. In 2023, it's at 120 million people. There's 169 people in the world that are displaced. That's not to mention any past 2023. But anyway, I'm going to move us along and bring us to this next work that for me it's called The Deepest Blue. It owes a great debt to Derek Walcott, and this is one, it's a public art project. It's done for the terminal in Miami for Carnival. And I had the opportunity to propose this project and they worked for it. And the work maps the bottom of the ocean from the coast of Jamaica, almost the edge of Florida, to the islands at the very edge of Cape Verde. And so even if it was going to be a public artwork, it was going to be sort of a terminal cruise line for people to go on cruises and not going to be paying any attention to it. I know the reality of things will not always be the same, right? The idea of making things that might be for the future might not end in the same place in the future. But I wanted to make a memorial. I wanted to make a memorial for all these bodies that were lost in the Middle Passage. All those bodies that are lost crossing from Haiti and Santo Domingo and Cuba to the United States that are never recovered, never seen, and there's no place where anybody can go to mourn them. And so one of the things, as you can see in the work, is the use of technology. For this particular project, I use LiDAR, which is a system that they're using now to actually map out any part of the terrain on the planet. And it's all data that you pull and you manipulate and you construct. And so each individual tile is made, and so it's first, the data is pulled together, it's then milled as a solid mold, a mold is made, and then it's casted And eventually, once it's all put together, I sort of went ahead and painted it by hand to really mimic the way you actually see the image if you were to go onto Google Map. Like that's the deepness and the darkness and the lightness, and really thinking about the different colors of blue and turquoise that exist in the Caribbean that don't exist anywhere else. And so that particular work holds all of that. And also to think about the future, right? And the fact that it says un solo mar means there's only one ocean, and in that way we are all tied together. This brings me to the last bodies of work under the right. Is the body, is a series of new work that are called Black Innocence. And on the left is America, 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 Wake Up. What's really interesting is both of I have a practice of use of archives and collecting, and so in a way I'm beginning to archive the self. These the Venuses come from a series of Polaroid that I did in my early 20s that I held on, because I knew that eventually I wanted to use them, and it's sort of kind of working through this idea of beauty and the body and how could a Black body be beautiful, and recycling in a way sort of the traditional European idea of how you sort of model beauty. In reality, the images are dark, you can barely see them, and the overlay is this whole other sort of Black desirability of the Black body that also is unfolding within the images. The America images, and I don't know if you can see really well, into the next image. Okay, this is what I have a close-up of these. The America Wake Up, which is the one on the left, was actually done in 1998, I think. I was doing a residency, PS1, and they had put us in the clock tower. And so very familiar with the space and how artists have used it. And so thinking of the work of Myra Clark and how he sort of cut into the building. And so these eagles are on the rooftop of the building, and I hired a photographer and friends, and they sort of strapped me to the top of the eagles. And I was really thinking about all of those sort of, what are they called that you see now? And sort of the way that the Americas were described until the, I'm blanking out, but I can't, no, it's not in Spanish, but it's, I know it like it's very traditional, I have it here somewhere, but I'd rather continue. It's sort of the way in which in early sort of kind of in the 19th century, in map making, they assign female characters to like Britannia. Yes, the allegories, that, and there you go. And so playing off of that, right, but in a way, in two ways. A, America is in crisis. We finally got there. Thinking about this work being made back in 1998, this is pre-September 11, all of that stuff, and really thinking about the need of sort of this commercialism that is taking us into, running us to the ground in a way, and also questioning the notion of America being white, right? But also in the title, the fact that this is sort of like a dream of an arch that one needs to wake up. And this is it. Really wasn't too heavy.
So much, Anna, and of course their feedback for what we said before. And our third speaker will be Zoe Charlton. So please welcome Dr. Charlton.
It's just, it's a form. It's like, oh, I wasn't sleeping, but now, sitting here, and it feels like I can I should just say,
Okay.
it's not hard.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It's all, I mean, it's all.
Really?
For sure, and I was like, she's like, this is an application. Yes. Okay.
Hi, good evening. Hello, hello. Hi.
Okay.
And she talked with me about why she got Howard, and I met Howard because of the sick. And I realized that, you know why I'm at Howard, and I keep going back to Howard, is because the late Ed Love was my professor. And so I keep coming back because of Ed's legacy, and because the warm welcome here. So anytime you want me to come back, please let me know. I will always come back to Howard. Before I begin sharing my own work, I want to ground the conversation by highlighting the work of N. Carmen Lane, who is an artist, organizer, curator, and steward and founder of Atonsic. And Atonsic is an artist organization, an artist-led organization in Cleveland, Ohio, that centers healing and creative leadership through a Black and Indigenous, queer, and two-spirit lens. The print you see here is from a show by Amos Paul Kennedy Jr., shown at Oxford Gallery at Atonsic. And it prioritizes Black and Indigenous contemporary art. And this work is by Freeman Robb, and it resonates with the spirit of this panel, calling attention to the ways that race, identity, and language are not only represented, but made and remade in the visual field. So good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank Dr. Melanie Harvey for inviting me to be a part of this year's Colloquium. I'm honored to be in this space at a time when the visualization of our histories is under such direct attack. The work we do here matters. My art is rooted in narrative and specificity. My family comes from the Florida Panhandle and moved around as part of an Air Force family. I create these narratives as entry points into broader narratives or broader ways of thinking and conversations about how we inhabit and transform spaces. Rather than focusing on racialized binaries, my work considers specific communities, cultural objects, and spatial history. I recognize that racialized difference is present not because I'm creating from a position of being other, but I'm sharing narratives specific to my experiences. These stories exist on their own terms. And I've organized my work thematically rather than chronologically, highlight how my research with space materials and bodies and memory also evolved throughout my practice. My newest installation, Third Watch, is installed in the bell towers and balcony terrace at North and Maryland Avenues in Baltimore, so please go and see it. The figures transformed the city's blue security lights, which were installed to monitor communities in the 1990s, into something altogether different, symbols of ancestral protection and care. The pregnant figures for all forms from African conditions depicting fertility. The blue light emanating from within the rendering suggests life. And what I'm asking is, what happens when we reclaim surveillance infrastructures and transform them into protection on our own terms and for ourselves? My thinking and the making, which is actually the work, it's the thinking and the making, is an acknowledgement of how race, gender, origin, and context work together in our lived experience. The piece challenges the narratives that label people and spaces as dangerous and in need of policing rather than protection. Watch is part of an ambitious initiative called Inviting Light, curated by Derek Adams. And I just want to take the time and say, just thank Derek. And the artists are guidance artists that bring other artists into opportunities they have. And actually, I'm sitting in this room and I'm looking out at this landscape and I see a lot of artists in this room that do that. Another one is Sheldon Scott. Another one is Rachel. This project, Inviting Light, was beautifully supported by Bloomberg Philanthropy and was realized in collaboration with Paradise Labs, whose fabrication expertise was essential in bringing these things to life. While the third watch examines how literally these illuminated and racialized forms function in public spaces, my next piece that I'm going to show you there goes the neighborhoods for similar themes in domestic environments. And so in that one you can see the figures when they're lit up. So the figures belly, light, breath, and pulses move everywhere. My work continues in a very different way with neighborhoods in the neighborhoods, and it's a collaboration with Rick Delaney. We built a suburban cul-de-sac with a white picket fence, 150 different shaped garden gnomes, whose symbols of white symbols of white symbols, can't stop what they are. They painted their skin in seven different shades of black and brown. I'm so happy that you're laughing. These pieces examine what happened after the Great Migration, when our cohesive neighborhoods began to fragment as families moved to the suburbs. The seven distinct shades reveal colorism and class stratification within our own communities, making visible what we don't always discuss openly among ourselves. So suburbia may be the topic, but race is the issue. There goes the neighborhood considered public and domestic, and how racialized difference appears in cultural objects themselves. While my spatial installations and collaboration examine culture and history in physical environments, I'm equally interested in how cultural objects are transformed and reproduced and recontextualized. Materials themselves carry and transform meaning, right? You know, these masks are from specific cultures, the Fangs, Bembe, Nuba, Lega. They gain the attention through their transformation into plastic. So these are hand cast into plastic. The material choice speaks to mass production, commodity culture, and resilience simultaneously, examining how cultural objects become decontextualized in global markets. There are approximately 55 of these. By working with specific traditions and resisting flattening of diverse cultures into a monolithic African market. So continuing with the theme of material transformation, my rendition series further explores the politics of replication. In my rendition series, I created 6 variations of an African statue that I call Sid. She's my same height, and at one point we had the exact same hairdo, same complexion. I was like, size of my family. Okay, I'm going to take a pause. I am the third set of twins, the second set of twins on my dad's side. So I just want to let y'all know I don't have to do anything alone. I can't explore with people, so you know it's a part of my DNA. So black and blue coloration of these statues speaks to bodies marked by systems that simultaneously categorize and individualize us. I deliberately named these works renditions to reference multiple meanings: artistic interpretation, legal extradition, and enforcement transfer, connecting them to questions of how our bodies are controlled and moved across boundaries. This exploration of how bodies are controlled, moved, and transformed naturally led me to consider the communities that have been physically displaced yet persist in memory. Before I show this, I don't know, This focus on bodies and the relationship to systems of people led me to explore how memory and embodiment function as forms of resistance to erasure. When communities are displaced or history obscured, how might a body itself become a fight of reclamation and remembrance? My animation, Smoking Hollow, pays homage to a former African-American community founded in the 1890s in my hometown of Toronto, Florida. This is a 1-minute excerpt from a 38-minute feature-length. And when it's shown, it's projected 30 feet wide. Whoa. So in the animation, it starts with a blank slate at her incognita, a white space. And as she's walking across the white space, she gives birth to trees. And then the second version comes across the string, and she gives birth to row houses or shotgun houses. And many of the images of shotgun houses, and those are in black and white, are from the first town neighborhood in Tallahassee, Florida, as well as other areas. And then the third version of her goes across Spain, which is giving birth to little one of the leaves of birth. So, while Smoky Hollow explores community living animation, our next project examines similar themes to a different medium. And these are still very interesting. Bodily presence and absence included in this series, and it's called Stroll Bloods. These life-size silk portraits appear in watermarks on handmade cotton paper. So these are life-size, the figures are 60 inches tall and 60 inches, and it's a green. The life-size silk portraits are only visible when parts of life are looked at in a certain direction. And they're anchored by a paper painting of my grandmother's estate. They're named after beings in Gulliver's Travels, in the book Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, who were declared legally dead at age 80, leaving property and eating sin. These works explore what remains when our bodies become transparent, when the land persists, and the labor that we contributed still remains. And the series connects with legal status with racial and class identity. How our bodies can be simultaneously present yet invisible. So by connecting it to my grandmother's property and exploring how my identity relates to inheritance, to land ownership, to legal recognition across generations. In the series, I was closely with Master Filmmaker Nicole Donnelly of the Working Insurance. Whose expertise in handmade paintings made these complex watermarks possible. So I'm moving now from personal memory to collective history. And this next project explores how entire communities can be simultaneously present in the land. The themes of memory and space come together in this 70-foot by 25-foot mosaic called Threshold, which maps both the physical and metaphorical distances and earthquake with Black people history. And it connects Lebanon, which was a pioneer community, or that pioneer community, at the site of earthquake justice, with Lowellville, which was a Black farming community that once stood where the suburban development was on. The work makes tangible how communities are displaced, yet continue to influence the landscape. This large-scale mosaic was facilitated through Virginia Shore Art Advisory and meticulously fabricated by the artisan at the Yale of League in New York, whose traditional mosaic techniques brought this fusion. I think it's really important to name faculties, right? I think I have a lot of great ideas, but I don't know anything. And that's okay to say. But I want to realize it in another meaning, right? And I've been fortunate to have opportunities presented to me to explore, right? Like anybody knows code, would like to go. So while thresholding down the community displacement on a public scale, the next image considers similar themes that need in folks who are more accessible. All of the works explore, all of my works explore how our story and our history take shape in a game-based community through the knowledge. Not as abstract ideas about race or racializing, but as real experiences of how I lead human work. This piece is a part of a piece called Permanent Change Station, and it looks at movement and displacement. This installation is an 18-foot drawing of a figure looking out at a terraced landscape alongside a pop-up book where we put out plants. So I'll explain the entire, right. And the title comes from military members leaving service members and their families, something I experienced growing up. We're North Korea. Malcolm Major Studios helped in the fabrication of this piece. And this is the full piece. So living on military bases, I saw firsthand how race and racialized identities work in spaces that were supposed to be mutual. From the outside, all military housing looked the same. The inside could live inside, much like the guardian under those houses. But when you step through the front door, you feel quite different. Inside might be furniture from the Philippines or Germany or Japan, other locations than overseas, along with family photos, books, and objects that clearly mark identities from the region. We learned, my family and I, have learned to maintain one appearance in public while expressing more meaning in stores. This shows me how race shapes what we see and what we show, even in places designed to be unknown. I want to close with a thought about why this came about music. Today, when there are really things to people, how we share our history. Creating art that honestly tells our complex stories becomes a way of protecting and passing down cultural knowledge. My work suggests that race appears in visual culture not just in my body's work, but in the ways we relate spaces, transform material, and keep women's alive. It helps us see the rich, complex language of who we are beyond simple concepts. Thank you for listening.
Excuse me, can you use the mic? Can you use the mic? Yes, please. People online can't hear you.
I was going to say, I wanted to ask each of the artists if they would speak a little bit maybe to each other around this idea of movement that helps define who you are and how you see. Especially, not only in terms of immigration, in terms of, when we talked about her movement from one national body to another, but the way that all move, in space, now and in the past. So maybe on this question of movement as it helps to define how you think of yourself in relation to others. Maybe who are something as well. Can we talk about as it helps you speak of identity, yes, and in relationship to others, and then pass them on to
doesn't have anything I'm going to start. And so I do, so I'm right now in Western Massachusetts, and the great thing about going to Western Massachusetts is when I'm there, I'm so made aware that I have an accent. But it's wonderful how this sort of body is moving and is changing, and at the same time remaining the same. So in Western Massachusetts, I have an accent, and when I go to Miami, and I love to do this, it's like my litmus test when I get to Miami, is so I go to one of those little cafeterias that we have them everywhere, and I want to, of course, you order an espresso, a shot of espresso, and because of the way I look, but somehow I don't look Latina enough anymore, whatever that is. I get to the counter, right, and I'm waiting, and so I begin the timing, like how long is it going to take before they come and take care of me. And if you've been to Miami and you're not a Latino, this is an issue, right? And so they're looking at you and they're trying to place you. They're doing their best to place you. And in many ways it's because they cannot speak the language, of course, but they're inhibited by you, they're inhibited by their lack of knowledge. And so I can sit there for anywhere from 3 to 10, 15 minutes waiting for somebody to get enough courage to come and ask me. If I get to that counter and all I have to say is hola, that's it. Service in the spot. The body has not changed, the face has not changed, the hair has not changed, but the perception of who I am based on how that other person can read me has changed. This is something that I experience continuously. I get on planes or conversation, and they try to figure out where I'm from, and they'll name every island in the Caribbean except Cuba, beginning by Haiti or Port. It's my tonality. And so we go through the other games in ways that I play, like I let them please learn Cuban, and then they want to test my language, and of course when I speak people, and that begins a whole nother conversation that we will not get into here today.
It's so funny. I am often in your position, and so it's so much fun to be invited to speak. My understanding of myself is very cheap. It changes everywhere I go. The most surprising thing that happens is in this country is when I travel from the South to the North. And when I tell people that I'm a Southerner, people often are surprised. How are you Southern? And I said, because I nap all the time. That is a sign of a Southern person, right? But a lot of it is about dialect, right? And it's about the way that I move, my physical body moves. And so folks often do that. And I am shocked when someone walks up to me and says, hey, you're American. You can say anything. give too much eye contact. I touch things. I can touch things, and I was in not supposed to. And I can't tell you how many times that the Dallas Amazon has been sung to me on frames because of that. And so I think that it's strange, right? Right? Why is JR impressed by the mother? I don't know. I would like to think that that has something to do with age instead, but like, okay. But I think that that's a really curious part of migration and mobility, is that I am understood differently depending on where I am. In the end of January, I was in Morocco, and I was easily identifiable as an because of the way that I'm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hearing that question just brings to mind just the reality of consciousness about movement that you have as a black person. And cautiousness, I would say, is the most important thing that if we inherit through generation. So the idea of thinking or living free, and the idea of existing free is something that is always the most intentional thing for black people to exist, or at least to channel. Because from a young age, especially if you grow up in a family with a lot of women who are religious, you're going to hear caution a lot. You're going to hear like, look where you're going. Don't, things that are very cautionary will be the legacy that you inherit the most. And my work, I feel, since growing up in that type of mindset, has really been about trying to imagine what freedom looks like as an art object, as a subject matter. And to be able to translate that you can have walking in a gallery or a museum. Is experiencing art as a black person was the most exposed experience of seeing art and seeing the culture. And that other races of people who come to see art have the freedom of the leisurely experience of looking at art. And that was the original meaning or purpose for art in the context of a museum or a gallery. It was more like, let's go to the museum and let's go have lunch after. But when we go to a museum, we leave heavy. And sometimes it's other artists within our own cultural framework creates the heaviness that we already experience in our world when we walk out of the museum. So a lot of times for me as an artist, I enjoy the experience of all of my peers and what they make. But I also have been able to channel my interest in looking at that work from a formal aspect, which I think is really important, or aesthetics of how they are putting things together psychologically or intellectually. That's what I try to focus on when I go to look at art, especially art that is represented histories that are fractured or traumatic. So the idea of movement and how to translate my experience as a black person, as a black man, is always restrained by caution. So to me, movement in my work, or movement or the existence of it within the practice of looking at all my work, especially work I presented today, was about a desire of being centered. And the fact that some people from various cultural groups never have to proceed with caution, or never think to proceed with caution. And to me, that's a luxury that I do not have. So movement to me has to be very intentional. When I see a young boy or girl walking down the street, I usually feel caution for them. And that's what I inherited. I inherited caution for other black people walking down the street when I see them. And it's always interesting, the hard reality of a parent who see a free-spirited child that they have to remind them of caution. And to me, I feel like that's something that I hope that my work can counterbalance through the history of what I make and how people receive it when I'm gone.
I think this, we always talk about looking at, previous images by people, whether in Americans or in Europe, as people of color, which is always, of course, something that sometimes we say to each other, we have to do what we do, being women of color. And, of course, we think about like how we do with Bell's incredible video, where she plays on whiteness privilege, or free, white, and 21. And I bring that up because there is, as we talk about the seriousness of what we heard panelists say, I also think that there's humor that is a kind of tone that goes among some of their projects. And I want to talk with them about that in this moment. That's going to be my second, and I'll review I have one more question for them, but it kind of dovetails. So I'm wondering if each of you, how do you feel if there's a sort of humor in your work, not only in terms of theme, but probably in terms of your choices, your family choices, in terms of color, from either the brown slide. I'm just thinking about in some of your projects, not only like that we just see with Professor Charlton's work, but of course things we saw with Professor Valdez's work on the sort of body that is consumable in a sort of outrageous way, and then with Professor Adams's work, even with the color of those images that are usual. Could you talk more about each of you about, if I'm right, there's a sense of cleaning that we also want to use for aesthetic.
Well, what's really interesting just about the things I incorporate in my work, like objects and different formations of objects, really came from my teaching experience in undergrad. I went to Pratt for art education, and I worked in public schools, and I worked at museum schools and different things like that. And working in public schools is always about like recycling, like bringing material in, and then we have the tempera paint, which is very chalky, but they usually come in very bright colors. So a lot of my just influence of my work has always been drawing from things that I understand people have some relational, relational aesthetic, some relational, like attachment to things that I, from teaching elementary school, I learned a lot just about how we see what we see, how things are put in front of us, and how things that we learn to accept as real or believe. And it starts from grade school. And so when I'm using color or using things that are vivid, I'm aware of the way that they operate through the theory of color, and the way color is formed, and the way color is distributed to promote certain responses, emotional responses from the audience. So color can be very humorous when you think of the way it's applied. I think what is really overlooked the most within black art and black art practice is the intentionality of color. I think a lot of times people look at color as, because we're blacks, it's colorful. And not understanding that if you're working with an artist who is academically trained, who went through the process of light color design and other classes, those classes that we have to go through to get our degrees, that color becomes a different level of intention within our practice that is put there to incite a particular emotion. So color can also make you laugh, it can make you cry, it can make you do a lot of things that you may not even think you could do if it's applied in the right way psychologically. So when I'm using color, it's very psychological. It's really, sometimes, when you, that's why people say, my work is black joy. I'm aware, it's not necessarily what I'm always thinking about when I'm making my work. It must be a response to how people feel looking at my work, which is one of the things that they say a lot. And I'm okay with that because I get joy out of making it. And I think that if I'm having fun making what I'm making, and it feels joyous to the receiver, then I've done a good job of communicating through color. So color for me is very intentional, very strategic, and if you can see from the slide presentation, my style of working varies from very abstract work to figurative work to colorful to stripped down. It really is intentional. When I did the sanctuary work, I used the pattern that I associated with the migration theory that Jacob used in the whole palette with the series. I use that intentionally. So sometimes the viewer who looks at my work doesn't understand all of the serious thoughtfulness that goes into why I apply the color that I apply and what type of emotion comes from the color that I apply. And I'm very much interested in color. And I think just like a doctor who goes to school to study medicine, as an artist, I think very much the same of what I hope the outcome would be from implementing certain materials, color, and things like that. So I think humor, for me, could be something that is very serious. And we have works where it says, because the thing that I grew up with black people would say, it's so serious, you have to laugh at it, or something like that. Like, get the laugh, stop from crying. That's what they would say. And I've named some pieces that. But I think that the way that we deal with humor or the response of things that make us laugh is to understand there's layers to our happiness. Like it is layers to our happiness. And I do think that being happy as a black person is a very intentional practice. It's something you really not say it all the time, we have to keep. Like it's not given to us. We have to keep our happiness. Because we are not necessarily put in a position where happiness rises to the top. So we gotta bring it to the top. So humor is definitely something that I think about and I try to insert it where I can, but I still see the seriousness even in the things that I make the most funny. I see the serious layer in it.
Right. About how humor can be a really design. And I also need to do that as a humor in work. Actually, I think that all of my work has some element of humor, absurdity, or irony in it. And those are used to create more texture in the work. I also find that most of my interactions with folks employ humor, irony, or absurdity. And so why would I divorce that from the things that I make, right? I sit in my studio and chuckle all the time. And if things work together and they're really strange, I think that's pretty absurd. Let's roll with it. And so I think that humor is a way to underline and disarm folks too. And it's also a way to just defend. And I think that a lot of my early work was a way to use humor to defend. And I would say that that's a right to capture. I see many young artists doing that, younger artists, emerging artists doing that. And I think it's really important that we understand how to use humor and absurdity and harmonies and texture in work. My use of color was very strategic when I started that. It was a way to highlight importance, to place something onto a drawing that I meticulously did. as a way to disrupt that kind of serious. It's actually a way to disrupt a belief in or an experience to a certain academic portion of the data. That's what I do. It's really that kind of serves like this particular line. But I needed these little spots of color, little pivot sections or little flash sections to really shift my own thinking and to shift the way that the image was understood, was thought to be more important because it was done in a way. Now they're laying because it's based on flawed elements, fractured elements that are unified because the color is unified. And so the parts of the work that I think would express the dizziness, the disconnect, the strangeness becomes secondary and glossed over because the color was so bright. And what I hope is that people see the way that certain things fit together in dark as a way to think about this kind of term unity together. And the other thing that I'm using, which I think is a nod to the absurdity, is that they start to become larger and they are not easy, not only are they not easy to store, but they're not easy to install. And there needs to be a particular kind of place for this sort of thing. And so I think that that is another element, another texture that helps the work that I do make the point that it needs to be. How strange is it to see a one-third scale house recreation of my grandmother's house put upside down and in an equal space? I think that that's impossible. And most times you can't even walk around it. I think that that is something that I carry around every time I get a sidewalk. Is how can I use color? How can I use this bit of humor? And how do I use scale to talk about some very serious things?
When Carol mentioned Latino, sort of one of the reasons that touch color, I for the longest time ceased to use color. And in part because it was expected to me, it was expected of me to have color. It was like this is who you are, and it was a stereotype and a classification that I wanted to avoid. And so when I started to work with the color China Raz specifically, I actually was very conscious and very intentional about the color that I made. Each one of those is a recipe. It's the pigments coming together within a set color. It's a recipe of pigments that I put together to make the color. And so when I was thinking about it, and a lot of the inspiration came out of reading literature, from the 17th century, 18th century, and their description of female bodies in relationship to porcelain. I really wanted to make colors that were fictitious. They were not real, right? Like there's no yellow skin, and there's no red skin, and so those were incorporated into the selection of pigments that were made with this intentionality, right? That people will go there and go like, that's not real. But at the same time, what I enjoy about that work is that, and I know that it's working, because often when it's out someplace, people will go and they'll actually compare their skin to, like they go up and down the road to figure out where in the scale they are. And that brings humor to me, and that's partly what I intended the work to do, and to also have this feedback of the no red skin. Because then we have to get into a conversation about it.
Thank you so much. I think, in the interest of time and managing our space, I wonder if we could give our panelists one more round of applause. And take our questions. questions and ourselves over to the gallery space where we can enjoy the faculty exhibition and also engage in our panelists as well, engage with them as well. So again, Dr. Everett, is that exactly how we should do it? Absolutely. Okay. Let's do that. So again, please join us in the gallery space. And again, we're so happy that you could join us here. Thank you.
Like scaring me. He's like scaring me. She really got a question. No, I said, she said, tell them the sound is off. That was funny. And I was like, Lord, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because you see their money. Yeah, yeah. Straight. I've been straight. I've been to the gallery. Yeah, like, that's been up, so that's the fastest. That's awesome. Yeah, she was like, yeah, so Stevenson and my job, but he was my mom. Stevenson. No, it's all so they all hang over like JP. Right. Yeah. So that's the live stream. Okay.
So like there's like one grade the next week like they need to one grade
It's right upstairs. Yeah, come.